You're applying for a marriage-based or family-based green card in 2025, you need to listen up. Immigration policies under the Trump administration are shifting and are going to get tougher. Denials will increase if you make certain mistakes. So today, I'm going to give you the top 10 mistakes that will get your green card denied and 10 things you can do to avoid that denial and to get success in your green card process. At the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to prepare your application in 2025, avoid the red flags, and protect yourself against those traps in 2025. So let's get started. I'm U.S. immigration attorney Sharifa Tharpe. I help clients to get their papers legally here in the United States. I also provide you with updates and information that will empower you in your immigration journey. Number 1, prove your marriage is real. This is harder than you would think. Right? A lot of people think that just by getting married alone and showing that marriage certificate, that's enough to be able to establish the marriage is real. But there's a difference between showing a bona fide marriage, that's where you are building a life together, and whether the marriage is legally valid. You have to show both during this process. Immigration officers are hard on immigration fraud, and they are going to be very hard on fraud in 2025 and beyond. If you don't have strong evidence that your marriage is real, that means bona fide, you will be denied, even if legally the marriage is valid. That means you went to the courthouse, you went to the church, you got married, you have a marriage certificate. But the marriage certificate isn't enough. You need to show it's real. That means you're building a life together. Here is what you need to do to establish that your marriage is a bona fide one. It's best to submit a joint lease, joint documents like a joint bank account, insurance policies, photos at different times, places, seasons with different people, friends and family, and make sure everything you do as a married couple is documented on paper. If your spouse gives you a card, make sure you keep that card so that you can show that your spouse gave you maybe a wedding anniversary card or a birthday card or a Christmas card. If you send flowers to each other on a regular basis, make sure you show the receipts from sending gifts back and forth like those flowers. If you make purchases together, make sure you record those. Now, in the process of showing bona fides, there are certain types of challenges that you need to be prepared for. For one, if you have a large age gap, that's a red flag for fraud. And so you have to be ready to answer questions and show detailed evidence that your marriage is real and it's not just an arrangement. Another red flag is you elope very quickly, maybe shortly after meeting. You need to make sure that even if that's the case, because I have represented clients who have eloped shortly after meeting, you do need to make sure that you take the time to build your life together, or to at least start to build your lives together so you can back up that with evidence. 2, avoid mistakes on your forms. One typo can cause huge delays, even denials. USCIS often rejects cases, and during the last Trump administration, that is what happened. If there was even one mistake, one blank box on the forms, it would be rejected, and in some cases, even denied. So here's what you need to do. Double check every detail. The most important aspects of the application will be the names, your biographical details, your addresses, your employment history, and your immigration and criminal background. You definitely don't want to make any mistakes on that section. If you've had any past immigration or even criminal offenses, it's time to stop and get the advice of a trusted attorney that can help you to navigate these issues, because they can complicate your case. never lie. Always tell the truth, even if it might be difficult or scary to tell the truth. That's because lying can be held against you and can even bar you permanently from ever getting a green card. So you don't ever want to be caught lying. It can be construed as fraud or misrepresentation. 3. Prepare for your interview. For the past 3 years, they have been waiving interviews. That means that in the final interview for marriage-based and family-based green cards was not required. They would go by reviewing the evidence in front of them. However, my experience during the last Trump administration tells me that those interviews are going to come back. That's because during the Trump administration, every married couple had to go to an interview before they would approve the green card. It was standard policy. People weren't getting their green cards without going through the interview. Now, the interviews can be tough, and you should never take them lightly. Green card interviews are not just a formality, and it's going to be more important than ever to make sure you get it right the first time. Officers are trained to catch fraud, so they're very sensitive to anything that implies fraud, like inconsistencies in the interview process. If you're unprepared, you're gonna fail. Here's what you need to do to ensure a successful interview process. Practice. For example, when I'm preparing my clients for the marriage-based interview, I role play to help them to understand the feel of the questions and to get used to being questioned about their marriage, especially when sometimes it might be a little uncomfortable and personal. By role playing and practicing answering questions, you're going to answer those questions confidently and consistently. Make sure when you show up at the interview, you're dressed appropriately, preferably business casual attire. And I've seen this all too often. When your answers don't match with your spouse, they do construe this as a fake marriage. So you definitely want to touch base with your spouse on what your favorite foods are. You want to make sure you get familiar with your home settings and your surroundings. Pay attention to your spouse. I know these are very small details that we take for granted, but the officers certainly won't take it for granted. So you need to make sure you are very much aware of your surroundings that you share with your spouse. You're very sensitive to your spouse's needs, their preferences, their routines, because these are the kinds of questions that the immigration officer is going to ask in this interview. They're going to ask things like, what are your favorite foods? What do you like to do? When did you meet? Where did you go last weekend? What did you do for your anniversary? And sometimes they separate you to see if you answer similarly. So be ready for those possibilities. And I always say this. You know your marriage is real. So make sure you go in there, be confident, and be ready. 4, watch out for those public charge issues. I bet that didn't cross your mind. That is one of the most overlooked aspects of this application process. The public charge rule allows immigration officers to evaluate the income of the petitioner to determine whether the petitioner, that's the spouse, the U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse, is able to have enough income, sufficient income, to support their immigrant spouse or relative. If you don't pay attention to that and you don't submit the right documentation to prove sufficient income and to be able to show that you've filed your taxes, then your application will certainly be denied, no matter how real your marriage is. The purpose of this public charge evaluation is to determine whether the immigrant in this situation is likely to depend on public assistance. If based on the evaluating the income, and if the income isn't sufficient, the officer can find that the immigrant is likely to be a public charge. That means they're likely to primarily depend on public assistance, and that makes them inadmissible. So you definitely don't want to overlook this one. Here's what you need to do to ensure success during this process. Have a strong sponsor who earns enough money. Now, Keep in mind that in some cases, your U.S. citizen spouse or your family member may not make enough money, but you shouldn't let that stop you because you can find co-sponsors, those people that do make sufficient income to step in and show their income instead. This is sort of like co-signing. So you'd have somebody who co-signs on the affidavit of support to allow you to proceed without being found to be a public charge. Avoid applying for public benefits like food stamps or Medicaid. Now, I do understand that there are exceptions in certain cases, like for emergency Medicaid in emergent situations. And as a matter of fact, most immigrants will not qualify for Medicaid or food stamps in the first place. And keep in mind, if you have U.S. citizen children, they may still qualify for the food stamps and you may be able to get them on your children's behalf. That would not mean that you took the benefits out. However, always make sure you consult with your attorney before taking or applying for any public benefits. During the last Trump administration, they did look at this more strictly and they did hold this against immigrants who took public benefits out. I suspect that they're going to bring back those rules where they're going to look at public benefits like food stamps and Medicaid. In addition to that, they may expand the public charge rule to look at much more than just income of the petitioner. They may look at other things like debt, credit score, household size, education, medical history, employment. These might be factors that also play into the officer's evaluation about whether you're likely to be a public charge. We haven't seen those changes yet, but during the last Trump administration, that it was the exact policy that was in place until Biden removed that policy. So we can expect to hear an announcement at some point over the next 4 years detailing a new public charge rule. And once again, just make sure that before you submit the application, you evaluate whether your sponsor, that means the U.S. citizen or resident spouse or relative who is sponsoring you, if they make sure they make enough money. If they don't, get that co-sponsor ASAP. Now, during the last Trump administration, if the affidavit of support was not submitted correctly, they would often give one chance and then deny the application. So you want to make sure you get that affidavit of support right the first time, because you may not be getting more than one request for evidence before they deny the application. Now, make sure you get your police record and make sure you get your medical exam done. If you're outside of the United States, you are going to be required to go and get a police certificate showing that you have a clear background or that you don't have any offenses that will render you inadmissible. Here in the United States, when you're doing adjustment of status, you do have to make sure you have a complete medical exam. In addition to that, if your medical exam is not complete, then it means that they can still find you inadmissible based on insufficient information or incomplete medical examination. So you definitely don't want to make that mistake. Now, here's what you need to do to make sure that's a successful process. If you have a criminal record, make sure you gather official documents, police reports, and the disposition of the court to show the outcome of your offense and to show the details of the offense. They will not make a decision without first reviewing the certified police and court records about that offense. Make sure that your medical is done by a USCIS approved doctor. Yes, you can't just go to a doctor around the corner or to your family doctor to get this medical done. There's a USCIS link that provides you the ability to search for approved doctors, USCIS approved doctors in your area or close to your zip code where you can go and get your medical done by that physician. Make sure you do that and do not make any mistakes of going to just any random doctors. You will be denied based on wrong medical exam. If you have any past DUIs or if you have any past drug convictions, this can lead to severe immigration consequences. And I will say this, stop right now and make sure you talk to an immigration attorney about your options, because you don't want to walk into this blindsided, because you could be deportable or you could be inadmissible. You may need additional documents to be able to assist you to succeed through the process. And that goes for any and all criminal offenses that you've had in your past. Now, here's another tip, and I know a lot of people have been asking about this. Is the COVID vaccine required? The USCIS announced in January 2025 that the COVID vaccination is no longer required. So that means that you can move forward with a medical exam without getting the COVID vaccine. However, the other vaccinations are still required. So make sure you bring your proof of vaccinations to your doctor so that your doctor can document those vaccinations and then advise you if you need any additional vaccinations to comply with the medical examination. 6. Avoid red flags that trigger extra scrutiny. Just based on circumstances, cases may go through extra fraud detection. It may cause delays through the process. You want to make sure that you reduce the possibility of this happening as much as possible. So here's what you need to do. If you have a big age gap, cultural differences that are quite obvious, or you entered a rushed marriage, provide extra proof of the relationship. That also goes if you've had multiple previous marriages, especially if the U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse has had multiple marriages with previous immigrants that they've sponsored before. You definitely want to slow down here to document the proof of your bona fides so that you don't raise red flags that cause delays because of additional fraud detection processes. If you had a prior denied petition or visa, then you definitely want to tackle those in your application. And of course, always consult with an immigration attorney like me to make sure that you have the right approach when you have hurdles like this. If you met your spouse online and then you married very quickly, you want to make sure that you can show the ongoing communications with the spouse, show family involvement and interaction as you became engaged and as you got married and built a life together. 7. Avoid submitting a skeletal application. Now, what do I mean by that? A skeletal application, in my eyes, is an application that doesn't have much evidence to back up the bona fides of the marriage. I know I went over this before, but I think it's really useful to get a little more in depth in the kinds of evidence that you need to be submitting. Now, previously, I talked about submitting a joint bank account, joint leases, joint insurance documents, estate planning documents. Now, when we're talking about these documents, sometimes a lot of people think it's just enough to print a bank statement. The bank account may be empty, but they're still printing a joint bank account that's empty with both of their names on it, and they think that's enough. Well, that's actually a red flag. I have seen it time and time again where I have had to step in on behalf of clients to respond to notices of intent to deny, it's called NOIDs, because they submitted bank statements that didn't have much money in there. And to the immigration officer, that has very little meaning because it doesn't speak to commingling of funds. If you're building your life together, then why is it that they're not seeing any activities in the bank account? Why is it just two names on a bank statement? Any two people can come together to open up a bank account, and the immigration officers know this. So if you really want to show that your marriage is real, you need to submit meaningful evidence that really shows the activities between you and your spouse, the meaningful activities, the spending of bills from your account, the fact that you're commingling your finances, you're paying for your bills from that account. You're submitting money on a regular basis to save money in a savings account. Now, that will tell the immigration officer more about your marriage than an empty bank statement with two names on it. And that's just an example. With every piece of evidence that you submit, you need to be thoughtful. If you're going to submit affidavits from friends and family, you need to make sure that it fits the correct formatting of the USCIS. They're going to get a lot more picky about the types of evidence they accept. You may get friends and family to write on behalf of you and your spouse about the relationship and the marriage, but if the affidavit from friends and family is not written in the right format, they can still deny and disregard that evidence, leading you to then still be denied for lack of evidence. So this is where it's very, very important to not only provide the evidence, but provide meaningful evidence. Now, the same also goes with the affidavit of support. When you're attaching the evidence of income, it needs to be meaningful evidence. For example, you need to show 6 months of pay stubs to show that you earn an income on a regular basis. If you own a business, you need to prove that you are receiving income through the business. You also should be showing your tax returns for at least the most recent tax year. So these are important forms of meaningful evidence that you need to make sure you're attaching. Be thoughtful about your evidence. Make sure you're following all the instructions that are attached, or making sure you're following your attorney's instructions about what to submit. Also, make sure that the documents are acceptable. Taking pictures of a picture is probably not going to cut it, especially in this Trump administration. So make sure you have high quality scans. Make sure you include real photographs of the both of you or with your family members. Make sure that your documents are submitted in an acceptable, professional manner. This is your future, and if they don't like what they see, or they have problems making out the information that you submitted because it's a low quality scan, or it's a picture of a picture of a picture of a picture, then you're going to have a hard time, because the immigration officer can just throw it aside and disregard it for being unreadable. So make sure that you're thoughtful about this evidence. Here at the law firm, we're very, very strict about that. We make sure that our clients' documents are acceptable as we submit them, because that causes less frustration for the officer and an easier time for the officer to make a decision. 8. Make sure that you keep your contact information up to date. Now, it is so important for you to change your address with the USCIS. You don't want to cause any issues where you're being threatened with deportation for just simply not keeping your address up to date into the system. But another reason this is very important is to ensure that you get your important documents at the right address. Because if the documents go to the wrong address, it means that you won't get them, and there may be important documents you need to respond to. If you're not getting them at the correct address, you will likely be denied because it went to the wrong address. So be sure to update your contact information. Here at the law firm, we collect documents on behalf of our clients, so our clients don't have that problem. Now, here's what you need to do to make sure you keep your contact information up to date. Update your address with the AR11 form at the USCIS account. Make sure you check regularly for email or mail from the USCIS. 9. Yes, immigration officers check your social media account. So definitely be careful what you put on your account. Here's what you need to do. Make sure that you're documenting your relationship online as well. And even, I know some people are private, they don't like to put their relationship information out there. But if you are going to put your information out there, make sure that you put the real thing out there so that the officers can see your everyday life and see your spouse, that you're living your life with your spouse or your relatives. Avoid posting anything that contradicts your application. Now, I know if you remember Facebook, it's complicated type of post, status post. Now, I don't know if you remember, and I may be aging myself, but I remember there was a point on Facebook where you could put it's complicated, right? That's definitely something you don't want to be putting on your profile when you're going through a marriage-based process because you're going to blur the lines. And definitely do not put single. Avoid other types of postings that are inconsistent with your marriage. For example, posting yourself partying all the time without your spouse, with all sorts of different people, being in different places without your spouse can look suspicious and it can raise questions in the officer's mind. So be careful what you're posting. And make sure that you're getting legal representation for any red flags on your application. I cannot understate this. If you have past immigration violations, criminal history, or complicated issues, get legal advice. Here's what you need to do. Consult an immigration attorney before filing. You don't want to be getting into trouble first and then trying to find an attorney. Sometimes the damage is already done at that point. Don't risk denial or deportation, especially during these times. No risk is too small to ignore. Do know that based on my past experience during the last Trump administrations, it will definitely be more challenging on your journey to the green card. But if you follow these steps, and of course, increase your chances by having an experienced immigration attorney guide you through the process, you will be successful. If you need any help or you have any questions, comment below. Also, go ahead and book your consultation on the description of the video below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. The more you do this, the more people will be able to see information that provides them updates and empowers them through their immigration journey. So until next time, take care.